What does Trump's commerce pick mean for Bitcoin? Putting the lame in the lame duck, regulatory capture in action, and more. The Monica Perez Show starts now. So we've got lots of news today. Trump continues to pick people for his cabinet. Some of these things I think are meant to be defeated. Some make no sense, but will not be defeated. We had a conversation I don't even know if it's on my audio feed yet, but it's definitely on the YouTube feed with a guy named Roger Huang who wrote Would Mao Hold Bitcoin? And it was a great conversation, kind of like a little bit of Chinese history and the interplay between the currency and the economy and Bitcoin and all of that. And it was good. It was a good intro to his book. He wrote a really cool book. And one of the things he mentioned was that Howard Lutnick, the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, was being considered for Treasury Secretary. And people thought that was a huge deal for Bitcoin because he's a huge Bitcoin proponent. Not only is he a proponent, but I think he's highly invested in it, either personally or through Cantor Fitzgerald. I think it was through Cantor Fitzgerald. But he's not the Treasury pick, he's the commerce pick. And I wonder if that means something. And I'll tell you what my theory is in a minute. But I did not know this. I hadn't heard this guy's name before. I certainly didn't ring a bell. But when I looked into it, this is from the Wall Street Journal. This is from the last paragraph of their article talking about him today. When terrorists flew a pair of passenger jets into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001, when I tweeted this, people obviously were like, they have to just make sure you understand what, the takeaway from that. 658 Cantor Fitzgerald employees who were in the company's offices there were killed. Remember that Cantor Fitzgerald was the one that was absolutely, way more than decimated. It was the majority of the people who worked there died. And you could hear it when you hear the phone calls of people calling home, knowing they're going to die, probably the people jumping out the windows. It was those guys. I think a lot of them. Lutnick wasn't at work that day, September 11th, Tuesday, because he was taking his son to his first day of kindergarten. Lutnick spent the years since the attack rebuilding the business and hiring thousands of employees. You would think the thing would go under since I guess most of the people in that office, they had other offices. So it's super fishy. People were told not to go. Anybody who missed it that day, I would say it's more than likely it wasn't a coincidence because the information was known by someone somewhere, right? It was something that happened. It wasn't an act of God. It was something that people did. So people knew about it and things, whatever, get out. And a tweet pointed out that that's a little late for the first day of school on a Tuesday, a week after Labor Day. And I'm absolutely think the chances are the guy was tipped off. However, his brother died there that day. His brother also worked there. And from from what I'm reading now, they were all super tight. I don't know if that's true, but they went out the night before. So my guess is this guy did get tipped off, but really didn't, who could ever imagine what that really meant? Like, just don't go to work today. Like there's going to be a raid, you could tell him anything. And what are you going to do when you find out that your brother died? You're not going to be like, hey, that guy who obviously has the power to, of life and death, you're not going to rat the guy out. So I thought that was weird. He also lived next to Jeffrey Epstein. There's nothing more to that story, but that's weird. This New York Times said Lutnick's cryptocurrency business stands to benefit from his close ties to the second Trump administration. Oh, one of Cantor's clients is the digital currency company Tether. Now, a client, you have to be more specific because if you're in banking, lots of things can be your client without being so much so that you would change your life for them. But this guy's a big proponent of Bitcoin. So one of the things that Elon Musk and RFK want, apparently, and a lot of other people, now BlackRock just a couple of hours ago said they want it too, a strategic reserve, a Bitcoin strategic reserve. I don't see what they're calling it, but BlackRock is just, this came out in an article on Crypto Slate today. While proponents see, okay, so this is the strategic Bitcoin reserve, which they're saying like would augment, I guess our gold reserves or something like that. I don't understand what the importance of it is. This article, which I'm including in the show notes, monicaperezshow.com, while proponents see Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation and a modernization of reserve assets, critics have raised significant concerns about its volatility, environmental impact, and security risks. Okay, so they're saying it would be like part of our reserve. Like, I guess we have currency reserves of our, well, a lot of people have currency reserves in our currency. But here's something I thought was interesting is that if he was going, so I thought if he was going to be treasury, or if Bitcoin were going to be folded into our monetary system, maybe it could act as the gold backing of the currency. Like we just have fiat currency has no backing because we're not on the gold standard. But what if the CBDC is on a Bitcoin standard? It would have two things going for it. One is it would have a standard of something that is finite and immutable at a certain point, like there's a limited number. And it would also be constitutional because it would be back in the hands of the government. So, I mean, that couldn't be worse than what's going on now, where the Fed is basically in private hands. I mean, it's obviously a government entity. I don't think that even matters. But the problem is that it's fiat money that has no tether, as it were. So then I was thinking if it were part of the CBDC, then it could act as gold. But if a treasury guy or a Bitcoin guy, then maybe that would move towards a Bitcoin CBDC. But what I was talking to Roger about is what if that the future scenario is closer to that hack attack thing from the 2010 Rockefeller Foundation article prescription that said the future world government, there's a possibility that actual governments will lose the faith of the people. It won't be effective. So you won't be able to make a world government out of them, stitching them together in the UN, but you would have a de facto world government in that these foundations who are on the ground responding to crises and humanitarian problems and all of that would be the de facto world government. And I thought, well, if you're going to operate outside the system, then how about Bitcoin being that de facto world currency? That could be where they're headed. So when I heard that he was going to be Commerce Secretary, I thought, well, maybe, because Roger said some people think there isn't going to be CBDC in this country, in the US, in Canada, in the echelon countries, basically. I don't know. I thought it was definitely what they were working towards. But I thought if they put the Bitcoin guy as the Commerce Secretary, then maybe they aren't necessarily going to fold it into the actual currency scheme, but they want him there to the extent it's going to affect Bitcoin. There's a lot of other things it's going to affect, but maybe because they want to make sure that Bitcoin is accepted as legal tender, because it's not accepted as legal tender in a lot of countries like China and Russia. And I would argue that prior to Bitcoin, kind of like Uber would be illegal under the taxi medallion regimes. I don't know how it got around it. Similarly, how Bitcoin gets around the fact that I don't even think you could use gold as legal tender in this country. I think that's what Ron Paul used to advocate for. He's like, you don't even have to make any big changes. Just don't make it illegal. Make it legal for people to use gold and stuff. So to me, these are things that just, we could have innovated previous to this and we weren't permitted, we were stopped. So I think maybe he would do that. I'm not sure. But then I read this, and that may still be true, but it was funny because I was thinking, wow, you could have this as like a gold standard, bring some stability back to the currency. And I think what I'm reading here in a quote about that not that long ago, I think what he's saying, it sounds to me like he is saying the problem with Bitcoin is its finite supply, that you actually want to go fractional reserve. I'm not positive that's what he means by this, but listen to what he said. The biggest barrier for traditional financial services companies, the big banks, big brokerage companies, are the current regulations which require banks to hold capital equal to the full amount of Bitcoin they manage. A restriction that significantly disincentivizes, that's a terrible word, them from engaging with it. Right now, today, if a bank were to hold your Bitcoin, they would have to set aside their own money equal to that amount and sort of like in the jail. I mean, you'd say, so, well, that's crazy. The answer is that's why they don't hold it. He envisions a future where regulatory changes will unlock these barriers, leading to an enthusiastic embrace of Bitcoin by major financial institutions. If the regulatory environment's good, you will see all the traditional financial services companies go headfirst into Bitcoin. So I'm just saying, is that what he's advocating for? That you should be able to not have to hold the Bitcoin itself or the equivalent of the reserves? I'm guessing that's because it's incredibly volatile. So if you were going to take a fractional percentage, say somebody had put $100 in your bank, but it was in Bitcoin, and you lent out 10 times that amount, that's how they do it. And then all of a sudden the Bitcoin went to 10, you would have like a debt collapse. I mean, our fractional reserve is zero now, so it's all imaginary anyway. But I guess the theory would be with Bitcoin, because it's so volatile, and he's saying, as long as they view it that way, it's going to keep banks out of it because they can't leverage the assets, which would defeat the whole purpose of having a finite thing be the basis of the CBDC. So now I'm back to like there'd be absolutely no benefit to it, and I hate the cashless society, which I always thought Bitcoin was setting us up for. Anyway, but the bigger picture with this guy is he's the head of Cantor Fitzgerald. They have a lot of investments in basically every industry along, in the world. And I remember, so I worked in a bank like over 20 years ago, and still to this day, and I heard people used to do this from Drexel. I made one investment, like they gave you a perk, like, like you have 401k matching. They're like, hey, you can invest in this fund of funds, whatever. So I gave them whatever it was. They made me give them like 10% of whatever the amount was. They leveraged the rest with a non-recourse loan. To this day, I still get checks from that. It's maybe $1,000 once in a while. It's probably down to 100 by now. But even if this guy stepped down, he would still have so much exposure to the investments made over the years. I mean, I don't know what his finances actually look like, but it's almost impossible to imagine that he is not going to be kind of permanently exposed to the stuff that he's invested in under Cantor. And even potentially someone as incredibly rich as he is with so many investments, including Bitcoin, yes, he would steer this thing towards his own interests or the people who control him. So what does the Commerce Secretary do? What could it affect? Let me just rattle off what it is, and then we'll move on. Managing a series of federal agencies, including agencies related to patents, related to weather, national security, and international trade, which is a big thing now. They're talking about tariffs. They also conducted the census, the decennial census. Decennial, is that what every 10 years is decennial? They're supposed to promote U.S. businesses. The role supports small businesses and is also interfaces with the White House to improve competitiveness and growth among American businesses. Somebody invested in large incumbents is not going to want to do that. Or I should say it's going to be against his interest to do that. And let's talk a little bit about how that works in the next story. Creating jobs. The role works to enhance private sector job creation by increasing investment and trade, supporting innovation, and more. I personally don't think the government should have anything to do with any of this. Like, help me protect myself and my stuff at best. And they don't do that because it's not in their interest. Overseeing trade. The Secretary of Commerce enforces trade agreements and manages the president's trade policy. I mean, that's a big job right now because that's going to be controversial. And who knows what it's really all about, the trade stuff. The president nominates the Secretary of Commerce, who the U.S. then confirms through a majority vote. I think that was a big thing, a simple majority. Wilbur Ross was under Donald Trump. He was a private sector guy. I guess they're usually government guys. Wilbur Ross was I believe, was the head of a Rothschild entity in New York that bailed Donald Trump out more than once. And he was also weirdly on the set of the show. Was it like Squawk Box or whatever, where the Italian guy invented, or the Italian American called for a new Tea Party. So my mother was a big Tea Partier and she would always say it was supposed to be about taxes. And then they started making new ones and blah, blah, blah. So she loved the Tea Party people, which like Marco Rubio, Chris Christie, Sarah Palin. And then they all turned out to be neocon warmongers, which made her crazy because, of course, a big contributor to the spending and the taxes are the wars. And not only the wars, but the horse trading the warriors have to do with the welfare people in Congress. So like in order to get the war spending, they always have to match it and more with the welfare spending. It's a big mess. Anyway, so this guy, like, I don't know, as we used to say in the biz, has got this pic has hair all over it. So, but my guess is it will happen. I mean, why not? Okay. The next story I wanted to talk about in relation to that is Spirit Airlines is filing for bankruptcy. And that just drives me absolutely crazy because they were talking about merging with Frontier, which is another small one, for like $2 billion, something like that. And then JetBlue came in and said, no, we want to merge with you instead. And it was, they way bid it up, like to over $3 billion. And the CEO, guy named Christie, said at the time, he's like, I think, if I'm to believe these articles, again, in the show notes, he said, or in his recent earnings call, he said, hey, I told you back then not to get greedy and not to do this, but you didn't listen. I guess it went to a shareholder vote. You didn't listen. And the Department of Justice and the judge that was ruling on the case both said it would be anti-competitive and wouldn't allow the merger to proceed. And it made me crazy. And then JetBlue had to pay him like $69 million, which is a drop in the bucket. And the guy said, Christie said, like, I'm not saying the judge was right or the DOJ was right. I'm just saying that I saw it coming. Like, they were not justified, but I knew they were going to do it. And I told you so. So, but it made me crazy because their argument was you were like the fifth and sixth largest airline. But that was after American, United, Delta, Southwest, all these airlines that are huge, that are market movers. And airlines, I remember, because I used to be a high yield banker, but the flip side of high yield is restructuring because some of those companies go bankrupt and then you have to deal with the bondholders, which is exactly what's happening with this. And the two big industries that went bankrupt all the time were supermarkets, or had bankruptcies all the time, were supermarkets and airlines. They are extremely competitive. And in order to get the business that they need, probably because there's so much, like with airlines, so much fixed costs, they have to fill those planes. The fuel is variable, but not by the flights use the fuel more than just like how many people are on it. So it's competitive. And when you have a competitive industry, how do they, especially one that needs volume, what do? They lower prices. They compete on the basis of price. And that's how you know it's competitive, because they go bankrupt. And the idea that JetBlue and Spirit the judge said it would merging those two would cause other airlines to raise their prices, does not make sense. Because first of all, what they did, Spirit spearheaded the bare bones ticket. So like you have to pay for everything, for every bag, for every Coke, for everything. And it was successful to the point where some of the other airlines were copying it, which gives you more options. So it gives you a lower baseline price, and it was a good thing. But the this Spirit was on the verge of bankruptcy. Like it was clear they were struggling because, and they were doing great until 2020, government policy, which the airlines went along with. Why, I wonder, maybe to shake out the little guys. I know they were promised things. We heard some hidden audio, some people gabbing on Zoom, like in official capacities, talking about how they would arrange it to benefit the airlines. One of the things that brought them down after 2020, not only not being able to fly planes, but the pilot shortage. Remember what caused the pilot shortage? Anyway, so Spirit falling out of the sky, as it were, is not going to help the competitive landscape. It's, of course, going to make it easier for the expensive guys to go back to their original model. And because Spirit would be committed to that, it was also going to make different offerings. It probably still is. But yeah, it was a totally uncompetitive thing to stop that merger. And it really irritated me because, so here's a validation of what I was saying. While there hasn't been a major U.S. airline bankruptcy for more than a decade, most of the big carriers have undergone bankruptcy at some point in the last 30 years. JetBlue argued that the merger would address the lack of competitiveness. The merger would address the lack of competitiveness, not the other way around, which I totally agree with, and it's panning out. But the journal article opens with this line. This is the print issued article. The U.S. government bet that Spirit Airlines could stand up to the big airline behemoths on its own. It backfired. I mean, it's complete crap, because as soon as that happened, I was like, airlines? You think the crappy straggler is going to, I think whatever it is, those four guys have 80% of the airline market at least. Anyway, total BS. And I'm just saying I could see it then. So it's not a miscalculation, I don't think. I think they are captured. I think they're captured by the regulators, all these people are captured by the big incumbent airlines. So this was something that confused me about the story. There's in here. So let me just read a couple of quotes from I couldn't find the print one online. It was weird. Spirit Chief Executive Ted Christie has said the industry has become a rigged game that benefits larger airlines at the expense of consumers. It has become ever more clear to me that we exist in an uneven playing field, Christie said in February, shortly after the merger was blocked. The law of unintended consequences is in full effect. Well, that was nice of him to say, but I think it was highly intended. I mean, it's rigged. It's intended insofar as they knew what they were doing, but it's unintended insofar as like you want to have a Justice Department that does the antitrust stuff, but it doesn't work that way. But I was confused by this comment by Bill Baer, the Justice Department's antitrust chief during Obama. DOJ was totally appropriate in challenging the elimination of one of two ultra-low cost carriers. Meh, I disagree. But the way he put it, it's like in that tiny niche, there were only two players. But how is that combined entity going to compete with the four big guys? They're going to offer a better product for less, or an equal product, or you know what I mean? Some value. When the judge ruled the deal would suppress competition, Spirit was left holding the bag, but it was their bag. They created it. He said Spirit investors bear the blame because they rolled the dice on a risky merger. And I was surprised. I thought I was lumping the CEO in with that, but it wasn't. It was the investors, which the CEO also blamed. Anyway, but it's still going to operate. It doesn't just go away. The problem is they just had more debt than they could service with this incredibly reduced revenue after 2020. Anyway, I have these like pet peeves. Like I hate it when things are just so obviously wrong and nobody realizes it because they don't pay attention to stuff that's like regulatory or economic or whatever. Okay, so Biden is totally lame, and I wish he would just be a good lame duck and not do anything, but he's a lame duck, and he's escalating Ukraine. So just when you thought the one thing you were going to get out of a Trump presidency was the inevitable end of the Ukraine war, this guy starts carpet bombing Cambodia. Like, this is him on the way out being like, I have all these bombs, How am I going to get my pension from Rand if I don't blow off these bombs? No, I wish it was just about that. I wish it were just about the money, but I don't actually think so. So my first reaction was, oh, it's one of those things where he's going to escalate by actually starting World War III on his way out the door. And then it's going to be one of those situations that we've seen so many times. It's such a setup. Like, I didn't start this war, but I'm going to finish it. Like, that would be such a Trump thing to be like, I didn't do this. I'm inherited a war. And what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to go bananas, And this like totally tripped me up that in the media, that's what everybody is saying. Whoa, I would not expect that. And not only is that what everyone is saying that the media is reporting, but they're not reporting it on their own behalf. They're reporting that podcasters are saying it. So I want to talk about the Ukraine thing, but this thing about legacy media and podcasting and everything, it's just really exploded around the Trump election. So I saw Elon, I hear everybody saying like, does this not prove legacy media is dead? But I saw Elon Musk's tweet, does this not prove legacy media is dead? And to me, that's like the memo. The memo goes out and you know what your theme is, like what you're supposed to pound the pavement on. I mean, I feel like the Wall Street Journal was the memo for conservative talk radio. That's why when I wasn't reading from the memo, you know what, there was an actual memo, one around COVID and one around elections. Remember, like terrestrial radio hosts got a memo that said, at least in one big radio operation, if not all of them, that said, if you talk about election interference, you are losing your show. So there are memos and they tell you what to say. And one of the memos is legacy media is dead. Okay, so what does that mean to me? That means that control alt media is rising. And so they're going to take alternative media and completely own it. Not that it isn't, I've been noticing this for a while now, but I also saw in the Wall Street Journal yesterday an article about how YouTube is the biggest podcasting platform now and how much money you can make on it. And they're going to run the table and all of this stuff. Of course, I can make nothing. They will not monetize me. I mean, I could probably reapply, but then I'd really get taken down. No, that's not happening. And so I'll tell you the podcasters they're quoting, but as an aside, JS on Twitter sent me an article saying Rumble, which I think is owned or mostly owned by Cantor Fitzgerald, is going private. No, public. It's having an IPO, which, by the way, really makes sense because I just wrote to them a couple of days ago. I tweeted about it. People have been commenting on my Rumble feeds. Why are there so many commercials? I've watched 5 commercials. I'm only 10 minutes into your show. And I pay $10 a month for Rumble. I've made in total for all of my entire experience, whatever it is, a couple of years on Rumble, $33. So where's that money going? They were going to go public. So what they needed to do is first they build up the listener base. Then they like make it look like they make a lot of revenue because they're absorbing all that ad money. They may continue to do it, but I just think these things are happening, and we are now finally moved. My mother's dead, so Fox News is dead. Like, that's it. I was like, it's my mom's generation, and they're gone. And it's shoo. So the powers that be are absolutely ready. And boy, they can silo you then. It's not just Fox or CNN, it's the birds of a feather, like in that Quartz article, that the whole point of having the internet is, and the cognitive infiltration by Adrian Vermeule and Cass Sunstein, the whole point of the internet is to create these silos that are just you, that bring out the worst in you, that enhance dysfunctional subcultures. Like, it's crazy. It's pretty crazy. So let me give you an example. This is the Newsweek article. The Newsweek article on Biden's escalation in Ukraine. Venture capitalist and co-host of the All In podcast, David Sachs, also posted on X, writing, President Trump won a clear mandate to end the war in Ukraine. So what does Biden do in his final 2 months in office? Massively escalate it. Is his goal to hand Trump the worst situation possible? And they go on to say, to do another. Breaking Point's podcast co-hosts Sagar and Jetty chimed in as well, posting on X that Biden is escalating the war in Ukraine out the door and trying to force Trump to get headlines showing him reversing policy, quote, when in office, plus making it more difficult to pursue a peace deal. Why would Newsweek read the tweets of two podcasters other than to promote all of that? The podcast, X, and those actual people. And they get to not own those thoughts, which is a good strategy. So, but let's see. So RT, Russia Today, and Moon of Alabama both had a little more sober view of what this is all about. It says RT reports at least 6 long-range ATACMS missiles were fired. Is it at ACMS? Do they actually read that stuff out? Fired into Russia's Bryansk region overnight. Moscow's defense ministry reported on Tuesday. 5 of them were shot down, while debris from one reportedly caused a localized fire at a military base, causing no property damage. But on Tuesday, Russia officially updated its nuclear deterrence doctrine. Now, this you probably heard on the news, to authorize an atomic, this is an RT, an atomic response to conventional attacks from countries backed by nuclear powers. This has been widely interpreted as applying to Ukrainian strikes with weapons supplied by the US, UK, and France, which is what we're talking about. That article also mentioned that $200 billion have been sent over to Ukraine by the US and her allies. They had another article quoting Thomas Massey. Robert Massey is a potboiler history writer, quite good. A lot of stuff about Russia, actually. They quote Thomas Massey saying, by authorizing long-range missile strikes inside Russia, Biden is committing an unconstitutional act of war that endangers the lives of all U.S. citizens. That is a good point. This is an impeachable offense, but the reality is he's an emasculated puppet of a deep state. Now, that's the kind of stuff that's dog whistles to the conspiranoid. I'm not counting myself out. I'm just saying I can tell it's a dog whistle. Okay. Now, Moon of Alabama, Russian President Putin has correctly pointed out that any use of these missiles, ATACMS missiles, requires the involvement of NATO assets for acquiring the targeting data and for planning and programming the missiles mission. So it is not possible for them to do it without us. We are participating in this strike. That's crazy. Using these missiles to support the Ukrainian bridgehead in Kursk will make it slightly more difficult for Russia to eliminate the incursion. Russia has said that it will not negotiate until Ukrainian troops have left its country. I think that's fair. To prolong the existence of this bridgehead. Oh, yeah, that's where they had made incursions, which of course is all for this kind of stuff. They're invading Russia. They're going to do what Napoleon and Hitler could not do. To prolong the existence of the bridgehead will thus prevent a fast peace agreement, which President-elect Donald Trump may have in mind. He said that Biden is using these rumors of North Korean soldiers and that there is no evidence of that. I think I was on top of that. The use of the missiles against targets in Russia will not provide any significant advantage to the Ukrainian forces, and there is no way left for them to sustain or win this war. Their defeat is inevitable. But using these missiles against Russia will escalate the war into a new dimension, prolonging the path to any peace agreement. And this to the sole benefit of those who are politically and financially invested in this war. So that's where we are with our lame duck. Let's get to some comments, if anything's still relevant, since I waited till the end. Hello. Thank you all for sharing the show. Wild Urban Gardener says, holy cow, Tether? No conflict there, LOL. She's referring to the Commerce pick Lutnick having as his Cantor Fitzgerald, which he runs. Tether is a customer of theirs. Again, Cindy, if it can be programmed, surveilled, and controlled, it's the same as CBDC. Yes, it is. I mean, I don't know. I know there are ways around it, but when I opened a wallet, I had to literally take a picture of myself with my license, and everybody does that. I mean, I do stuff like I know people who go completely private, and I really respect it. I think it's too late for me. I did not hear RFK Jr. at the Bitcoin conference. Cindy's asking about that. I assume he's a proponent. He was listed in one of these articles as wanting the strategic reserve. Runaway Slav ammo is a great form of currency, and hand loading ammo is the human blockchain. Not a bad point. I always personally thought a little moonshine would be a good currency. Frightening Me says ammo, yes, but salt since ancient times. Totally agreed. You mean you really need salt. Salted fish is nice. I think they used to use salted fish. JC says MAGA is just Tea Party 2.0. Both were created in 2012 and 2016 to derail Ron Paul's popularity and bring conservatives and libertarians back into the neocon fold. That's a great point, because they actually called Ron Paul the godfather of the Tea Party, the intellectual godfather. Runaway Slav says everyone always forgets about salt. Man, and it's funny, salt. If you eat too much salt, I know people go back and forth. I've seen my blood pressure is always kind of low, so I just don't care about salt. And then I just started going bananas. I don't know what I was up to, maybe drinking salt drinks, electrolyte drinks. My blood pressure went way up. I mean, maybe that's good. I don't know, but I don't think so. It did not make me feel good. James is wondering if they, quote, kill. I'm afraid of saying this stuff because I'm afraid there's an algo out there. What if there were another assassination time? I like to call the third time's a charm. What if there was a third time's a charm and Vance was the guy, and then he would do all this stuff? He's kind of said he would. Runaway asks if BitChute or Odyssey is still good for uncensored video hosting. I'm not sure they both exist still. Didn't one of them go away? BitChute was, last time I looked, so trolled with super nasty stuff, I could not participate. Michael says, Kat and I just remarked how super cute you look today. I have to say, I was wondering if anyone noticed. I made an extra effort. I blew dried my hair. I was like, oh, you know what it was? I read the YouTube article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, and I was like, oh my gosh, people are actually watching. I figured everyone just does what I do, and turns it on and drives in the car. And it's like, I better, I just think of this as us all hanging out, like we're at a meetup. Um, but anyway, so I thought I would make an effort. Thank you. Uh, I missed the thread here. Michael wants a link to an article, but I don't know which article you want. So if you ask me, Michael, I will give it to you, and it will all be in the show notes at monicaperezshow.com. Cindy says RFK Jr. suggested shocking executive orders he would implement day one. I don't know if it was RFK or Trump, but I think there were some things that I think that strategic Bitcoin reserve was something Trump said he would do via executive order on day one. The article that Michael's looking for is about Ukraine and Russia and Biden's zombies criminal action. All of those articles are already in my show notes, which will be up shortly. The ATACMS are pronounced attackums. Nice. Attackums, frightening me. Thank you for that. See, isn't it great we interact? Because then otherwise I have to like stop, like when I would just put the show up and then figure out what all the things that I didn't know and then have an anxiety attack, like my thing was not correct. But it's like the newspaper, they have corrections the next day. We have the corrections like at the same time, which I thank you very much for doing. Seeds are not a bad currency, Cindy says. I'm not sure seeds would be as valuable in my hands as in someone else's, although I'm doing a great job with grafting. I think I'm doing a pretty good job with that. And the wine, I'm not great at Insta either. Well, I'm not great. It's just too many things to do. So I'm enjoying Substack. I'm not really focusing on Insta. However, there's some of my wine stuff. This house we bought has a vineyard in the backyard, and the wine we harvested September 1st, we're working on it. It's delicious. I mean, I know it has to take some time, but it's like really tastes good. Thank you, Cindy, for dittoing Michael. She says no tax on real estate purchases via Bitcoin. How is that even possible? James says the RFK versus pharma psyop will be fun. I have to say, I am going to be interested in this. And look, I have hope. My hope is that the reason they're giving us these people, Trump included, is that they got to give us something. The flip side is they did fire all their guns at once and they're burning all these people because they don't need another psyop again, because as Trump said, you'll never have to vote again. Like, that's weird. All these things he says that he then contradicts with the next thing he says, like if they clip them all out and, in the history videos 50 years from now, it'll look like we were all in on it because he says everything. Runaway says, are you familiar with Scott Horton? Of course, I've actually met him. In person at Freedom Fest. He's a super anti-war guy, correct? Antiwar.com, if I'm not mistaken. He just released a book, Provoked, about how the West caused the Donbass invasion. I did a lot of work on that, and I would be happy to talk to him about his book. So the invitation is there. Grow tobacco. It's easy. I did not know you could grow tobacco. It'll work after the societal collapse. Stuart says I look slim. I think that's just wearing black. But I did lose a few pounds. I have to say I did lose a few pounds. But then I went on the vacation. I lost the pounds for, and of course gained a few pounds. But I'm working on it. I don't know why. I forget why. I have some reason why I want to just get a little skinnier. But I love like the Friday night cocktail. And, can't really get slim if you're cocktailing. Anyway, I had a couple of other little quick hits. Oh, I had this one thing. Let me show you. There's an article in the New York Times. What's killing kids? This is like today, something like that. What's killing kids? So I'm going to share the picture, and I want you to tell me if you can guess what's killing kids. Let's look at this. Let's look at this right here. That's 2020. That's 2020. There's a little hockey stick where it's the death rate of kids is declining, and then all of a sudden it starts to spike in 2020. Of course, the article says guns and drugs, and I would agree on the drugs. It's just not the same drugs she's talking about. But yeah, what's going to get? They have to whitewash this stuff. I mean, it was predictable. We all predicted it. And they got to explain it. I think they should just admit it. Wouldn't even matter. People would be like, they'd still line up for the next ones. Oh, I think they are kind of admitting it a little bit. Okay, so I've got another. Oh, here was something. Let's do this as the clip. There was actually kind of a funny New York Times headline. It's like the headline and the subheadline. Did school battles hurt Democrats in liberal strongholds? They're talking about the Trump election. Voters in the Virginia suburbs shifted toward Trump's. Some say they were still frustrated by pandemic closures and fights over gender, race, and testing in school. That was the whole thing. That's why the left went absolutely bananas with that stuff, in my opinion, because it's all a big club and we're not in it. And they get us to take responsibility for these things by manipulating our emotions. And that's how they did it. But let's see this thing. I was going to do the Captain Sully's 12-minute blow by blow of the, if you want to hear that, I can play it, but I kind of don't have the nerve because I'm afraid it'll be a copyright thing. But what's the worst that could happen? But it's 12 minutes. You want to hear it? 12 minutes would get us to 1 hour. I'm going to ask Stuart. Yes, I do look nerdy with glasses. I like the glasses, though. I am nerdy. I'm going to ask Stuart. I want you guys to vote in real time over here. Anybody in the chat who wants to tell me which they want to hear, the 12 minutes of Sully or the 2 minutes of the mom, a mom in trouble. I can tell you the story of the mom in trouble, but I can't recreate the Sully thing. I'm not getting an answer. What's going on here? Okay. I'm gonna. Yes, thank you. I wanted to do the 12 minutes of Sully. That's the vote. Okay. So, but let me tell you about this woman. Woman in, where was it? Was it Georgia? Georgia mom in Fannin County, Fannin, Fannin County, gets arrested, and her charges could mean 10 years in prison for letting her 10-year-old, and you see a picture of the kid, he's like a strapping 10-year-old, walk to the store less than a mile away. Somebody calls the cops on the kid in a red place. It's like woods. You can see the picture, woods. And they, I guess, bring the kid home. The mother wasn't there because she went to pick up the other kids. And they charged her, I guess, with leaving the kid home alone or whatever. And the takeaway from the anchor woman is make sure you look up the law before you leave your kids home. And I'm thinking, I have 2 sons. One's older, one's younger. The younger one went to like survival camp. You could leave him in the woods for 10 days and he'd be okay when he was 10. My other son has Down syndrome. I can barely leave him alone for 10 minutes now. But the law would say, leave the other kid home, the Downs kid. You know what I'm saying? The kid, a 10-year-old kid, that not only are they of different capacities, but different styles. And she was just letting them walk to the store. They want those kids handcuffed to the chair playing video games. Anywho, yes, child abandonment is a weapon used here to punish folks, Cindy says. So, Cindy, are you one of my Georgia people? Mark says, I was left home alone a lot when I was a kid. Yes, and my standard is, how would they handle an emergency? And I feel like my son who has Down syndrome really could not handle an emergency. He probably couldn't handle somebody creepy at the door, and he could not handle whatever, an earthquake. So I don't really leave him home alone. But the other one absolutely could, without question, from the earliest times. And you would teach them what to do, and they would remember it. Okay, so let's do the Sully thing and hope that I don't get in trouble for it, and then probably take it down immediately, which is why they're probably pushing podcasts to YouTube. All right, let's share this screen, baby. It's really fascinating. I'm nervous about it though, because I know that I'm not allowed.
January 15, 2009 started just like 10,000 other days, literally. And flight 1549 initially, like all those other flights for so long, was completely routine and unremarkable for the first 100 seconds. But this very suddenly, and I was aware of it at the time, became the worst day of my life. We were traveling at that point 316 feet per second. So I saw the birds about 3 football field lengths ahead, but not enough time to maneuver away from them. And then they filled the windscreen as if it were a Hitchcock film. And this was a large flock of large birds. The species Canada geese, they weigh 8 or 10, sometimes 12 pounds. They have 5 foot or 6 foot wingspans. And they struck the airplane along the leading edges of the wings, the nose, and into the center, the core of both jet engines. Now, jet engines are turbines. They're finely balanced machinery spinning at tens of thousands of revolutions per minute, and having a 10-pound object or two go through each of them in the center, the core of the engine, is incredibly damaging and disruptive. Immediately, I could hear terrible noises from the machinery being damaged I'd never heard in an airplane before. I could feel terrible vibrations I'd never felt in an airplane before. And then I received confirmation of what I believed had happened when I could smell coming into the cabin air the burning bird odor from the engines. And then the thrust loss was sudden, complete, symmetrical bilaterally, both engines at once. It felt as if the bottom had fallen out of our world. And my body responded immediately in a very normal human way to this sudden life-threatening stress. I was aware of that as it happened. I could feel my pulse shoot up, my blood pressure spike, my perceptual field narrow in tunnel vision because of the stress. I remember vividly my first 3 conscious thoughts. This can't be happening. Having read about many accident flights, a very typical response rooted in disbelief, followed immediately by, this doesn't happen to me. In other words, for over 4 decades, I had never been so challenged in an airplane I doubted the outcome. Followed immediately by a realization that unlike all those other flights I'd had for 42 years, this one probably would not end on a runway with the aircraft undamaged. And I was okay with that, as long as I could solve the problem. And so even though we'd never trained for this, in flight simulators at the airline, it was not possible to practice a water landing. They aren't programmed for it. The only training we'd ever gotten for a water landing was a theoretical classroom discussion. But because I had learned my craft so well, I knew my airplane and my profession so intimately, I could set clear priorities. And so I chose to do only the highest priority items. And then I had the discipline to ignore everything I did not have time to do as being only distractions and potential detriment to our performance. You see, I'm also well-read, and so I knew the neurobiology. I knew that multitasking is a myth, that when we think we're multitasking, what we are in fact doing is switching rapidly between tasks, not doing either of them well. And so I chose not to try to do too much. Within a few seconds, by memory, I had taken the first two remedial actions that we would eventually get to on the checklist over a minute later, over a third of the way through the remaining flight time. But I needed those actions to be effective immediately and not to wait. I turned on the engine ignition so if the engines could recover, they would. And I started the airplane's auxiliary power unit. I knew it was only a matter of a few minutes before our flight path intersected the surface of the Earth. I had to choose the best possible place for that to happen. Having flown into New York many times, I knew that there were only three options. There were only two runways that might be reachable. It turned out with reaction time they were not. And the only other place in the entire New York metro area, one of the most densely developed areas on the planet where it might be possible to even try landing a large jet airliner, would be the Hudson River. I suspected early on that's where we would end up, but I knew I had to try to consider at least returning to a runway if it was possible. I took control of the aircraft, made one distress call, worked with the air traffic controller, considered returning to LaGuardia, decided it was unreachable, considered trying to reach the Teterboro Airport in New Jersey across the river, decided that was not reachable either. And I told the controller we're going to be in the Hudson. He told me later he was shocked, in disbelief, and he assumed that by choosing that path, that we would all perish. And it was an agonizing 45 minutes until he found out that everyone had survived. Our first officer, Jeff Skiles, couldn't have had a better colleague that day or since. In a situation where the time pressure and the workload were so intense, we didn't have time even to talk about what had happened and what we should do about it. He and I were able to collaborate wordlessly by knowing intuitively in this developing crisis what we should do to help the other based on our own long experience. Had Jeff not also had 20,000 hours of flying time like I did, had he not been a captain before, had he not been so experienced, he wouldn't have known either to do that or how to do that. So he made an important suggestion at several points in the flight. He was silently cheering me on as I made each decision, but ready to intervene to check my performance if he thought I was making an error. I had a chance to make only one announcement in the cabin, and before I made what I knew would be the most important PA announcement of my life, I took what was probably an extravagant amount of time, 3 or 4 seconds, to choose my words very carefully before I spoke. I wanted to sound confident, not agitated, because I knew that courage can be contagious. And I chose specific words for specific reasons. Fortunately, we have the advantage of having a very well-defined and very concise aviation vocabulary in which there are certain single words that are rich with meaning. Brace is such a word. It signals to the cabin crew, the flight attendants, that an emergency landing is imminent and that they should help the passengers avoid injury during the landing so they'll be able to evacuate by shouting their commands to the passengers. And in the spur of the moment, I chose another word to give the passengers and crew in the cabin alike a vivid image, a word picture of what to expect, that without engine thrust, we were using gravity to provide the forward motion of the airplane. We were descending the equivalent in a hotel elevator, descending at 2 floors per second. So I knew it was going to be a hard landing. I just didn't know how hard because Jeff and I had never practiced this before. So I chose the word impact to give them that vivid image. I said, this is the captain, brace for impact. And immediately, even through that armored cockpit door, I could hear the 2 flight attendants in front, Donna and Sheila, and I'm sure Doreen in the back was doing the same, begin shouting their commands in unison to the passengers. Brace, 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 heads down, stay down. Hearing those words that day encouraged me. It comforted me to know that by saying the few words I had, but choosing the right words, I had literally gotten my crew on the same page. And that if I could find a way to deliver this aircraft to the surface intact, it would float long enough for the flight attendants to evacuate the passengers and for New York Waterway to send their ferries to pick us out of the water. And that was critically important on such a cold day. The air temperature was 21, the water about 38. Right before the landing, I asked Jeff Skiles a question. I said, "Got any ideas?" Now, some think that was a flippant remark, but it was not at all. It was just an indication of how deeply internalized these team skills are that I used to teach. I was saying to him, and he understood in context exactly what I meant, I've done everything I can think of that can help us. Are there any other actions that we can take that you can think of that would help us succeed even by a fraction? And Jeff's answer was, actually not. And he answered just like that. Not at all because he was being insouciant or not because he was resigned to an ineluctable fate. Far from it, we were fighting to save every life to the very end. He answered that way because he knew we'd done all we could. The fact that we could have that exchange just before the emergency landing of a lifetime is one of the more remarkable things about this flight and this crew and our diligence, our dedication to never give up, to try to save every life, to do everything we possibly could. And then finally, as we were approaching the water, again, Jeff collaborated with me wordlessly. He knew that the final critical maneuver was for me to try to judge visually, looking at this featureless water terrain ahead, where depth perception is inherently difficult, the height at which to begin raising the nose, to begin the landing, to trade some of our forward motion for a reduced rate of descent at touchdown, and to achieve the proper slightly nose-up attitude as we touched the water. So Jeff began to call out to me airspeed and altitude as I was looking at the water ahead to help me judge that critical height. And we were coming down so rapidly, if I misjudged it even by a fraction, we might start too soon and get too slow and hit hard, or start too late and descend into the water too rapidly in the wrong attitude. As we hit hard, but the deceleration, while rapid, was uniform. And based upon the forces that Jeff and I felt in the cockpit as we slowed to the stop, it was obvious that the airplane was intact, it was stable, it was floating, and people were probably still okay at that point. And in the most amazing coincidence, Jeff and I turned to each other at that moment, at the same time, using the same words, said, "Well, that wasn't as bad as I thought." But we weren't high-fiving. We still had to get 155 people out of an airplane taking on water in a river in January. I opened the cockpit door and shouted one word: evacuate. The evacuation went fairly quickly. Passengers and crew worked together to help out an elderly woman who had been boarded in a wheelchair. They helped a young family of 4, including a mother with a 9-month-old child. And by the time I left the airplane as the last one off, the New York Waterway ferries were all around us and the rescue was well underway. But it was an agonizing 4 hours until I finally received word officially that everyone was accounted for. And only then were my immediate duties completed, when everyone was safe.
Wasn't that amazing? I mean, when people say they don't have hope, just watch that. Like, I love the nobility of man. I love, uh, the value of education, of courage, of presence of mind. And like that lady who lets her son walk to the store. How do you think you get good at stuff? Who was saying what that that guy, what he used to fly? Somebody said in the notes here, what Sully used to fly back in the day, a big cargo plane, I think, and that it put a real hurtin' in Vietnam, which isn't great. But he says, "Oh, yeah, all right, dude flew F-4 Phantoms, literally war wagon Spanish galleons of the sky, near unlimited payload combos and weight capacity, put a hurting on the Viet Cong." So he probably could keep his head during, um, you know, the risk of death, which is great training. That's why I actually started to think after and I always think of this guy. I think it was Chuck Donovan. So Mark is in the chat saying, "Do I remember a pilot from Atlanta?" I think he was the guy who turned me on to the fact that American pilots are, you know, basically errorless. And I was wondering when I was flying around Asia recently if we actually have these flight programs for the military and even exercise them once in a while by actually popping off on people in order to support the airline industry. Because think of the relative size of the airline industry, the global airline industry. Even if there are controllers of the world who want to control the world, they're going to want to make sure people can fly. Anyway, very cool. Really enjoyed that. And thanks for hanging out and watching that with me. This will probably come down real quick. But until next time, thank you so much. This is Monica Perez.